COVID-19. Many parents in the US remain in limbo about schooling once the summer break is over. If it happens in person, some worry it might not feel safe. And if it happens remotely, it could be inadequate, isolating and force working parents to scrabble to find childcare. As a result, a new vocabulary has emerged in parenting groups and on social media. Pandemic pods, microschooling, homeschooling pods. These are all terms that describe a solution some parents have been turning to, organising small groups of students who plan to study at home together. So let's talk now to Jessica Bergeron in Atlanta and Professor Lewis-McCoy. Good to see you both. Jessica, you've got two young kids. What are your plans once they're due to be back at school?
The plans that I have right now currently, which have changed several times, the plans I have right now currently are to homeschool my youngest and to do virtual schooling for my middle school child so that she can keep up with the content.
Jessica, what are your worries about sending your children back to school?
The concerns that I have, I'm in Georgia, so the concerns that I have are around safety and planning and ensuring that making sure that the kids are going to be safe, as well as making sure I work in education, so making sure that the teachers have an opportunity to stay safe themselves and that their mental health and wellness are part of the quality instruction that's being provided to my kids.
And you don't trust that that will happen at the moment?
It's a little bit difficult to say. I think everyone's doing the best they can, and people are really trying to plan the best that they can. But the situation in Georgia is that many families do have to go back to work. We are pretty much open since the governor decided to open back up the state. We are pretty much open, and it's difficult to say how dangerous it might be for kids to be in school.
Professor Lewis-McCoy, what is your worry about all of these kids who may end up staying at home, being homeschooled in these pods?
Well, I think my biggest worry about particular pods is that we live in a world that is very segregated economically and racially. So many families that have more resources than others are going to reach across to their friends and they're going to connect up and they'll form a pod of 3 to 5 people, but they'll probably be affluent. They'll likely be college educated. And there are particular pods that are actually hiring private tutors and private teachers. So in a moment of crisis, those kind of pods that use additional resources can hoard away opportunities. It means that some of the energy that could be used in finding a collective solution to this crisis around education and this crisis around public health gets concentrated in just a few kids. And particularly for families that are living below the poverty line or near the poverty line, if they're not invited to pods and if their school districts haven't provided a space for them to learn at learning hubs, they are in a very dangerous position.
Jessica, what would you say to those concerns?
I agree 100%. A lot of the work that I'm doing as a volunteer is making sure that families have opportunities to get devices and making sure they have Wi-Fi and making sure that they do have equitable access to all of the challenges and all of the resources that other families do have. A big concern I have is for children with special needs and students that have disabilities who get specialized instruction at school. And that's the plan right now, is for that to be delivered virtually. And for some students, that is going to put the families in a very difficult position.
Professor, we've talked a lot so far about education. What about the value of socialization and the role that schools can play for kids, you know, being socialized? What do they miss out on when they're not in school on that front?
Well, all along the developmental trajectory, children are missing out on friends. So I think about my child who's 5 years old and interacting with friends and imaginary play are how she comes to understand the world. Later on in school, when we think about what allows people to handle sometimes the academic stress and rigor, it's their peer groups. They're also the same people who push you to apply to college, who push you to think outside of the box. And the mentor relationship between teachers and students can also be drastically changed in this virtual environment, because oftentimes you're not having deep, committed relationships. You're having very chopped up, short interactions.
Jessica, is there a way of countering that in these sort of homeschooling pods?
I've seen some creative solutions in some districts. Some districts are offering opportunities for teachers to spend half of their day going out into the communities. And I think that's a very novel and innovative solution where they're actually spending time with their kids and with the appropriate PPE and mask and sanitary and all of that, but they're out in the communities and at the community centers and wherever they can meet families so that they have an opportunity to interact with their teachers in a safe way.
Professor, is there an issue here around funding as well? Because presumably, if children aren't being sent to school, the school loses out on the money for that child.
Definitely. I've talked to a number of parents who have actually, out of an idea of goodwill, said, well, I know that a number of students who are in greater financial need will need resources from the school, so I'll hold my child back, right? I'll disenroll them from school and I'll use my private funds. The issue is that many schools in the United States, they base their actual allocation on number of students there. So when you pull out your child, that means that a school that was anticipating a certain amount in the budget will receive less. So that means students who are most vulnerable are increasingly put in a position where they have to do more and more with less and less. And much of this comes from a fundamental issue with American schooling, which is that our schools are funded by property tax and the federal government has underinvested in schools.
Jessica, can you take us through the sort of practicalities of how your pod will work? Who will be in charge? You know, who will teach, how many kids there'll be?
Yes, so I am, although college educated, I am in one of those situations where I have to work full time. But I also can't afford to pay a teacher. So the pod that we're developing is a co-op pod. So the parents have, each parent will have a different day and they'll be in charge of instruction for that day. So rather than having to ask my employer for 5 days a week, I can ask them just for one day to be flexible, and I can make up that time on a different day. The parents are going to share responsibilities for instruction or supervision, and they're also going to share responsibility around donations for sanitary and disinfecting supplies and things like that.
Professor, can I finally ask you how emotional this topic has become in the US and how much people are actually starting to look at the science? Because schools here in Europe, in some countries, have gone back very successfully. All kids have gone back, and the evidence is that the virus is not being transmitted in these schools and that kids are safe.
Yeah, it is a very contentious matter. Coronavirus has been contentious here, oftentimes between competition between different spokespeople from the federal government. So when people start to think about their children and the safety of their children, I'm not surprised they're concerned and scared. We are seeing more evidence about the safety of children, but one of our greatest concerns is that adults are also in schools. And even here in New York City, by choosing to close schools so late, we had a number of adult teachers die. And so there is this question of how we make sure children are safe as well as adults in buildings are safe, and how we need at this moment, we need clear guidance on how to do this, and we lack that.
Yeah, the sands are constantly shifting at the moment, it seems. Professor Lewis-McCoy, Jessica Bergeron, thank you both very much for joining us. Fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's take you to